Clark sat alone in the cold, sterile visitation room, staring at the industrial gray walls that had closed him in for the better part of 2 decades. His heart thudded heavily against his ribcage as he awaited his release, a moment he had imagined 1,000 times yet felt unprepared for now that it was upon him. The prison gates would soon open, not just to freedom, but to a world he barely recognized, one that had moved on without him. The door buzzed loudly, startling him from his reverie as a guard entered. "Let's go, Johnson. It's time," the guard said, his voice indifferent, a stark reminder of his insignificance in this world. As he stepped through the gates, the bright sunlight stung his eyes, a painful yet welcome sensation. He shielded his vision with a hand, squinting at the bustling world beyond the prison walls. Cars zoomed past on a nearby highway, their motion a blur compared to the stagnant air of the cell block. A worn-out duffel bag contained all his possessions, a few articles of clothing, a worn-out photo of his children, Beth and Mike, and a stack of letters from Chelsea, Helen's sister, who had kept him informed all these years. His heart ached as he clutched the bag. These were the remnants of a life paused by incarceration. The prison had arranged for a volunteer from a local church to pick him up. Pastor Mike, a stout man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, extended his hand as Clark approached. "Welcome back, Mr. Johnson. I'm Pastor Mike. I'll be giving you a ride into town." "Thank you, Pastor," Clark murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. They rode in silence for the first few minutes, the only sound the hum of the old sedan's engine and the occasional whoosh of passing vehicles. Clark's gaze was fixed on the landscape racing by, each mile bringing him closer to an uncertain future. Finally, Pastor Mike broke the silence. "It must be overwhelming, all this change," he said, glancing over with a sympathetic tilt of his head. Clark nodded, his throat tight. "Feels like the world went and changed without me. I don't even know if I'll recognize my own kids or if they'll want to see me. They're your family. There's always room for forgiveness and healing," Pastor Mike reassured him, his voice warm and certain. The pastor's words were meant to comfort, but they stirred a tumult within Clark. Forgiveness was a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. "It's not just them I need forgiveness from. It's myself," Clark confessed, looking down at his hands, thinking about the night that changed everything. As they approached the city, the familiar landmarks of his old neighborhood came into view. Memories flooded back, the good times before his world had fallen apart. The park where he used to play baseball with Mike, the ice cream shop where he'd celebrated Beth's 10th birthday, the simple, everyday moments he took for granted. Pastor Mike pulled up outside a modest brick building, the new halfway house that would be Clark's home for the foreseeable future. "You take all the time you need, Clark. Healing is a journey, not a race," he said, offering a comforting smile as he helped unload Clark's duffel bag. Standing in front of the halfway house, Clark took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. He turned back to Pastor Mike, extending a shaky hand. "Thank you, Pastor, for the ride and the talk." "Anytime, Clark. Remember, this isn't the end of your road. It's just a new beginning." As Pastor Mike drove away, Clark watched the car disappear around the corner. He was free now, free to rebuild what had been broken, free to find his way back to a family he hoped would take him in. With a heavy heart, but a glimmer of hope, he stepped through the door of the halfway house, ready to start the long journey home. Clark stood before the modest 2-story house where he had once lived, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The building looked unchanged, but everything else was different, including him. He hesitated at the gate, memories flooding back, the laughter, the arguments, the love, and ultimately, the betrayal. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the gate, the familiar squeak sounding louder than he remembered. He walked up the path slowly, each step measured, each breath deliberate. As he reached the front door, he paused, his hand hovering over the doorbell. It took all his courage to press it. The door opened, and there stood Chelsea, slightly older but still beautiful, with the same warm smile that had comforted him in his darkest moments through letters. Clark?" she whispered, her voice a mix of shock and relief. "Chelsea," Clark managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. I don't know if I should be here." Chelsea stepped aside, opening the door wider. "You're always welcome here, Clark. This was, and always will be, your home." Stepping inside, Clark looked around the living room. The furniture was new, but the layout was familiar. He could almost see Helen sitting there, smiling, before everything went wrong. Chelsea led him to the kitchen and made coffee. The silence between them filled with unasked questions and unvoiced fears. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle yet firm. "Clark, the kids know you're out. It's complicated." Clark nodded, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. "I understand. I can't expect them to just accept me back, not after everything that's happened. They're your children. They'll need time, just like you. But they want to meet you, Clark. They need to hear your side of the story," Chelsea said, encouraging him. Clark's gaze fell to the floor, his mind racing. "I need to tell them about that night, but how can I explain without reliving it all?" "You start by telling the truth, the whole truth, Clark," Chelsea advised, reaching across the table to place her hand over his. "It's the only way forward." "Will they forgive me?" he asked, looking up with hope and fear mingling in his eyes. "That's up to them, but they deserve the chance to decide," she replied softly. Clark spent the rest of the day with Chelsea, going over what he would say to Beth and Mike. She helped him sort through his thoughts, offering advice and support as they prepared for the meeting. As night fell, Clark sat alone in the guest room that had been prepared for him, his mind racing with thoughts of tomorrow. Would his children understand? Could they see past the horror of that night to the love he still had for them? Lying in bed, he rehearsed his words, each sentence a bridge he hoped would span the chasm between him and his children. Tomorrow, he would face his past, confront his ghosts, and try to rebuild the shattered pieces of his family. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he knew it was the only way to find peace, for him and for his children. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Clark prepared to meet his children. His heart thudded painfully against his chest with every thought of the impending reunion. Chelsea had arranged to meet at a local park, a neutral place filled with childhood memories of picnics and playful afternoons. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Clark arrived early, pacing under the old oak trees, their leaves whispering above him as if sharing secrets of the past. He spotted Beth and Mike approaching from across the park. His breath caught in his throat. They were no longer the children he remembered, but adults, shaped by years of life's complexities. Beth walked ahead, her posture tense. Mike lingered a few steps behind, his expression unreadable. Clark's palms were sweaty, and his heart raced as he stopped walking and waited for them to come closer. "Dad," Beth said curtly as she approached, her voice carrying a mix of defiance and vulnerability. Clark's voice trembled as he replied, "Beth, Mike, I've missed you both so much." Mike nodded slightly, his eyes avoiding Clark's. "We've got a lot of questions, Dad." "I'm here to answer them. All of them," Clark assured, his voice thick with emotion. They chose a picnic table under the oak trees, the very spot they had celebrated Beth's 10th birthday. Sitting across from his children, Clark felt the weight of the moment. He looked into their eyes, seeing both the children he loved and the strangers they had become. Beth folded her arms, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Why did it happen, Dad? Why didn't you trust Mom?" Clark swallowed hard, the memories painful and sharp. "I thought I was protecting her. I was so wrong. I saw what I thought was an attack and I reacted. I never stopped to question it because I couldn't imagine Helen would—" His voice trailed off, choked by regret. Mike's voice was low but firm. "We grew up thinking you were a hero, Dad. Then we thought you were a murderer. Now we don't know what to think." Clark's eyes welled up with tears. "I understand that, and I'm so sorry for all the pain I've caused you both. I was wrong, and I regret my actions every single day." Beth's eyes filled with tears as well, We missed you, Dad. Even after everything, we still missed you. It's been hard growing up without you. I missed you both more than I can say, Clark replied, his voice breaking. I know I can't change the past, but I'm here now. I want to be part of your lives again, whatever that looks like. I'll do whatever it takes. They talked for hours, unearthing the pain of the past and tentatively bridging the gap between them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, Mike finally spoke up, his voice softer than before. I'm not sure what comes next, Dad, but I'm willing to find out. Slowly. Beth nodded in agreement, wiping away tears. Yeah, slowly. As they stood to leave, Clark reached out, hesitating before embracing them both. They returned his hug, their bodies stiff but slowly relaxing. It was the first step towards healing, a moment of connection amid the wreckage of their past. Walking back to his car, Clark felt a mixture of sorrow for the years lost and hope for the future. It was a beginning, fragile and fraught with potential pain, but a beginning nonetheless. As he looked back at Beth and Mike walking away together, he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in many years, he felt ready to face whatever came next, buoyed by the possibility of forgiveness and a second chance with his family. After the emotional meeting with his children, Clark found himself grappling with a mix of relief and lingering apprehension. The air between them was still thick with the unspoken and unresolved, but a door had been opened, and for now, that was enough. Exhausted, he returned to Chelsea's home where he had been staying temporarily. The house was quiet when he entered, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background the only sound. Chelsea was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. How did it go? She asked gently, setting aside the wooden spoon. Clark sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was tough, but good, I think. We're starting to talk, really talk. It's a beginning. Chelsea nodded, offering a small smile. I'm glad, Clark. They've missed you, even if they're not ready to fully admit it. Clark leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. Chelsea, we've known each other for a long time. You've been a constant friend through everything. Why? The question had been burning inside him, fueled by the unconditional support she had given him, even at his lowest. Chelsea paused, her back to him as she fiddled with the items on the counter. It's not just because of Helen, or your kids, she started, her voice hesitant. I've always... She stopped, taking a deep breath before turning to face him. I've always cared about you, Clark, more than just as my sister's husband or the father of my niece and nephew. Clark stared at her, taken aback. Chelsea, are you saying... Yes, she interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. I've loved you, Clark, even when I shouldn't have, even when it made no sense, and especially when it was the hardest thing to do. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Clark felt as if the floor had shifted beneath his feet. All the years of friendship, the letters, the visits, it all took on a new meaning. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked, his voice a whisper. Chelsea gave a sad smile. What good would it have done, Clark? You were married to my sister, and you had a family. I couldn't be the one to add to your burdens. And after everything happened, you needed a friend, not another complication. Clark moved closer, his heart racing with a cocktail of emotions. And now? He asked, searching her face. Now? Chelsea repeated softly. I don't know. But I couldn't stand by any longer without telling you the truth, not when every day I see the pain and the effort you're putting into rebuilding your life. Clark reached out, taking her hands in his. Chelsea, I don't know what to say. You've been my rock when I didn't deserve one. If there's a chance for us... Chelsea squeezed his hands, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Let's take it one day at a time, Clark. That's all we can do. They stood there in the kitchen, hands clasped, each confronting the myriad feelings that Chelsea's revelation had unearthed. For Clark, it was as if he was seeing her for the first time, not just as Helen's sister or the aunt to his children, but as a woman who had silently loved him through his worst. The evening stretched out before them, filled with new possibilities. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed more freely than it had in years, each laugh and shared memory weaving a new layer into the complex tapestry of their relationship. Clark felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with wonder. Here, in this house and with Chelsea, he might just find the strength to forge a path toward a future he had never dared to imagine. The days following Clark's revelation of Chelsea's feelings were filled with a delicate dance of rediscovery and cautious optimism. Clark, still wrestling with his own emotional rehabilitation, found himself increasingly drawn to the quiet strength Chelsea exhibited. He began to see her not just through the lens of gratitude, but with a burgeoning affection that surprised him in its intensity. One cool evening, as they walked through the small garden behind Chelsea's house, Clark decided to broach the subject that had been on his mind since their conversation in the kitchen. "Chelsea," he began, pausing to pluck a leaf from a low-hanging branch, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about everything you've told me." Chelsea, who had been quietly admiring the garden, turned to face him, her expression one of gentle encouragement. "And what have you decided?" she asked, her voice steady, but her hands betraying her nervousness as they fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "I haven't decided anything concrete," Clark admitted, his gaze meeting hers. "But I know I want to explore this. Whatever this is between us, I'm just not sure how." Chelsea smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Clark, we don't need to have all the answers right now. Let's just take each day as it comes. Learn about each other again. There's no rush." Clark nodded, feeling a weight lift slightly at her words. "That sounds perfect," he said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "I just don't want to mess this up, Chelsea. You mean a lot to me, more than I ever realized." Chelsea reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Clark, you've been through so much. We both have. Let's just be kind to ourselves, okay? We deserve that much." They continued their walk, hands clasped, the silence comfortable and reassuring. As they rounded the back of the garden, Clark stopped and faced Chelsea. "I have a question," he said, his tone more serious. Chelsea looked up at him, her eyes curious. "What's on your mind? Do you think love can really start from where we are, after so much pain and history?" Clark asked, his voice thick with the gravity of his emotions. Chelsea considered his question, her gaze drifting towards the setting sun before returning to meet his. "I believe that sometimes the most profound love can come from the ashes of our hardest experiences. It's not about forgetting the past, Clark. It's about building something new, something possibly even stronger." Clark absorbed her words, feeling a mixture of hope and awe at the depth of her understanding. "Thank you, Chelsea, for believing in new beginnings, even when they seem impossible." They resumed their walk, the garden around them bathed in the golden hues of the evening sun. As they reached the porch, Clark paused and turned to Chelsea. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Just us, maybe in town? I'd like that very much." Chelsea's face lit up with a smile. "I'd like that too, Clark." That night, as Clark lay in bed, he thought about the journey ahead. There were no guarantees, and the path was unlikely to be smooth. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of excitement for the future, a future he hoped to share with Chelsea. It was a tentative step towards love, but it was a step he was finally ready to take. Clark awoke to a soft golden light filtering through the curtains, casting long, warm stripes across the room. It was another day, another chance to mend the fabric of his life that had frayed so badly over the years. He had promised Chelsea dinner, a simple gesture yet fraught with the weight of new beginnings. As he prepared for the day, His thoughts were a mix of anticipation and a deep-seated fear of the unknown. After a quiet breakfast, Chelsea found Clark in the living room, surrounded by papers and a few old photographs he had retrieved from a dusty box that morning. "Planning your memoirs?" Chelsea teased lightly, sitting down beside him on the couch. Clark chuckled, setting the photos aside. "Just sorting through the past, I guess, trying to figure out how it fits with my future." Chelsea glanced at the photographs, her expression softening. "You've had a full life, Clark. There's so much more ahead, too." Clark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I hope so. I want to make things right, Chelsea. Not just with Beth and Mike, but with myself. And He paused, looking at her earnestly. "I want to make sure I'm someone worthy of you." Chelsea reached out, her hand covering his. "Clark, you don't need to prove your worth to me. We're all a work in progress, aren't we?" "Yes, but I want this. Us to work. For the right reasons," Clark said, his voice filled with a resolve that had grown stronger over the past few days. "Then let's focus on building something meaningful, together." "One step at a time," Chelsea suggested, squeezing his hand reassuringly. Later that day, as Clark walked into the small restaurant he had chosen for their dinner, he felt a nervous energy he hadn't experienced in years. It was quaint, with a few rustic decorations and a warm, inviting atmosphere. As they sat down, a candle flickering between them, the conversation flowed more freely than Clark had anticipated. "So, how did you spend your day?" Clark asked, watching Chelsea as she perused the menu. "I was at the community center. We're organizing a new arts program for kids. It's hectic but rewarding," Chelsea explained, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful. You always had a way with making things better for others," Clark observed, admiring her passion. Chelsea smiled, then her expression turned thoughtful. "Clark, how are you feeling about everything? With your family? With us?" Clark took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "It's like walking a tightrope, but I feel more grounded with you by my side. I'm scared but also hopeful. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Chelsea replied, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I'm here with you, for every step." Their dinner passed with a mixture of light-hearted chatter and deeper, more personal conversations. As they shared dessert, Clark felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in a long time. "Chelsea, I don't know what the future holds," Clark began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty of his thoughts. "But I'm grateful for this, for today, for you." Chelsea leaned in, her gaze sincere. "And I'm grateful for you, Clark. Let's keep building this life, together, no matter what comes." As they walked out of the restaurant, the crisp evening air felt invigorating. Clark wrapped his arm around Chelsea's shoulders, pulling her close. Walking back to the car, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, Clark knew that rebuilding his life wouldn't be easy or quick. But with Chelsea by his side, it felt not only possible, but promising. Several weeks had passed since Clark and Chelsea began navigating the waters of their new relationship. With each passing day, Clark felt a stronger bond forming, not just between himself and Chelsea, but also gradually with his children, Beth and Mike. On a breezy Saturday afternoon, Clark proposed a small family gathering at a local park, a place laden with memories and laughter from the days before his incarceration. It was a gesture to bridge the past with the present, and perhaps to forge a pathway to a future together as a family. As they spread out a blanket and set up a simple picnic, Beth and Mike arrived, each carrying contributions to the meal. The air was filled with a cautious optimism. "Hey, Dad," Mike greeted, clapping Clark on the shoulder as he set down a cooler filled with drinks. "Chelsea, this looks great." Chelsea smiled warmly. "Thanks, Mike. I thought we'd keep it simple. Sandwiches, salad, and of course your dad's famous lemonade." Clark chuckled, handing out glasses filled with the homemade drink. "Famous, huh? Well, I don't know about that, but I did put extra effort into it today." Beth, who had been quietly arranging some dishes on the blanket, looked up and offered a small smile. "It's good to see you doing things you love again, Dad." Clark met her eyes, noting the lingering traces of pain mixed with a hesitant acceptance. "It's good to be here with all of you," he responded, his voice thick with emotion. As they settled down to eat, the conversation turned towards lighter topics: movies, local news, and some shared memories of past family outings that made them all laugh. It was during one of these stories that Clark decided to delve a bit deeper. "You know," Clark started, pausing to gather his thoughts, "sitting here with all of you, sharing stories and laughs, it reminds me of how much I've missed, and how much I want to make things right for everyone." Beth listened, then nodded slowly. "It's been hard, Dad. Losing you, then dealing with everything after. It tore us apart in many ways. But I appreciate this, what you're trying to do." Mike chimed in, "Yeah, Dad. It's a lot to process, but it feels right being here today. Like maybe we can start fixing some of those broken pieces." Chelsea reached over to squeeze Clark's hand, giving him a supportive look. "We're all here, learning from the past and building for the future. That's what families do, right?" Encouraged by their words, Clark felt a renewed sense of purpose. "I want you both to know, no matter what, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We have a lot to catch up on, a lot to mend, but I'm committed to this. To you both and to us," he said, gesturing around the picnic. The afternoon passed with more stories, some planning for future gatherings, and even discussions about a family holiday trip. It wasn't just about forgiveness or making up for lost time. It was about redefining their family's identity and relationships. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the park, the family packed up. Clark looked around at his children and Chelsea, a feeling of contentment settling in his heart. "Thanks for today, everyone," Clark said as they headed towards their cars. "Let's keep this going. Let's make sure it's just the beginning of many such days." Beth hugged him tightly. "We will, Dad. Let's definitely keep this going." Mike nodded in agreement. "You can count on it, Dad." As they parted ways, Clark felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in many years, he felt like he was finally on the right path, with his family by his side. Months had rolled by since Clark and Chelsea solidified their relationship, and Clark had begun to mend ties with his children, Beth and Mike. The initial awkwardness and hesitation had given way to a growing closeness and understanding within the family. Clark was finally feeling the bonds of kinship strengthen after years of absence and turmoil. One crisp autumn evening, as they gathered at Chelsea's house for a family dinner, Clark decided it was time to address some unresolved feelings and seek a deeper reconciliation. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of roasting vegetables and baked bread. As they sat down to dinner, Clark cleared his throat, capturing everyone's attention. "I've been thinking a lot about what I wanted to say tonight," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "First, I want to thank all of you, especially Chelsea, for your support and patience with me. This journey, it hasn't been easy, but having you by my side has made all the difference." Chelsea smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "We're in this together, Clark. No need to thank me." Clark nodded, then turned to Beth and Mike. "And you two, I know it hasn't been easy adjusting to having me back, to figuring out where I fit into your lives. But you've both been incredibly gracious and understanding. I'm here tonight to ask for your forgiveness, for all the years lost and the pain caused, not just because of what happened, but for the aftermath that you had to deal with on your own." Beth set down her fork, her eyes meeting Clark's. "Dad, it's been a rough road. Not just for you, but for all of us. I won't lie and say it's been easy. But seeing you, really seeing you try, it means a lot to us." Mike nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Dad, it's been a process, but we're getting there. You being open and present, it's changed a lot for us." Clark felt a wave of relief wash over him, tempered by the knowledge of the long path still ahead. I promise, I'm here for the long haul. No more running away from the hard stuff. The conversation shifted to planning for the upcoming holidays, a topic that lightened the mood and brought laughter back to the table. As they discussed where to spend Thanksgiving and whether to cook or order in, Clark felt a profound sense of normalcy and belonging. After dinner, as they were clearing the table, Chelsea pulled Clark aside. "You did well tonight," she whispered. "It feels like I'm finally starting to right some of the wrongs," Clark whispered back, his eyes reflecting the flicker of candles from the dinner table. "Just remember, forgiveness isn't just given, it's earned day by day, and you're doing just that," Chelsea replied, her voice reassuring. Clark nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know, and I'll keep at it every day, for them and for us." As the night wound down, and Beth and Mike left with promises to return soon, Clark and Chelsea stood at the door watching their taillights disappear down the road. "Feels like a new chapter, doesn't it?" Chelsea remarked, leaning her head against Clark's shoulder. "It does," Clark agreed, wrapping his arm around her. "A better one. Thanks to you, to forgiveness, and to second chances." Together, they stepped back into the house, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, fortified by a newfound strength in their familial bonds and the redemptive power of love and perseverance. The journey of forgiveness and redemption was ongoing, but Clark was no longer walking it alone. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If today's story resonated with you, or if you've experienced similar challenges in your relationships, remember you're not alone. We hope this video offers some insight or comfort as you navigate your own path forward. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We value your perspectives and would love to hear your stories too. Join us next time for another profound exploration of the heart's resilience. Until then, take care and keep seeking your truth.